I blocked my husband from visiting his mom, and the moment I did, I knew something would break. I just didn't know it would be everything. I remember standing in the middle of our living room, my hands shaking uncontrollably, staring at the quiet screen of my phone after I blocked her number. It felt like pressing a button on a bomb, one of those moments where time seems to slow down and you can feel the weight of your decision settling into your bones. I told myself it was the only way to save my marriage, the only option I had left after years of trying everything else. But deep down, somewhere beneath all the justifications and the desperate hope, I already felt the cracks spreading through the foundation of everything I'd built. Our life in New York had once been simple, almost boringly predictable in the best possible way. We were just two people building a home together, trying to raise our children in a place where they'd feel safe and loved. We had our routines, our inside jokes, our quiet Sunday mornings with pancakes and coffee. It was the kind of ordinary happiness that you don't appreciate until it's gone. But his mother had always been a storm waiting at the edge of everything, lurking on the periphery of our peaceful life like dark clouds on the horizon. She had a way of creeping into every part of our lives, into our finances, into our parenting decisions, into the way we spoke to each other when we thought we were alone. At first, it was just small things that I tried to brush off. A comment here about how I folded the laundry wrong. A suggestion there about what we should name our children. But soon those small intrusions became demands, then pressure, then guilt that wrapped around us like vines, choking the good parts of our marriage until we could barely breathe. I tried to be patient with her. I really did. I told myself she was just overprotective, that she'd raised him alone after his father left, and their bond was naturally strong. I told myself that love can look controlling sometimes, that cultural differences might explain her behavior, that maybe I was being too sensitive. I made excuses for her for years, smoothing over her sharp comments, apologizing to friends when she was rude at gatherings, pretending not to notice when she undermined my parenting in front of the kids. But when she started using money as a weapon to manipulate my husband, something inside me began to break in ways I couldn't ignore anymore. Every time we argued about a bill, the mortgage, the car payment, the kids' school expenses, her name would find its way into the conversation like poison seeping through cracks. Every time I tried to set a boundary, no matter how reasonable, she'd find a way to make me the villain in her carefully constructed narrative. The final push came one weekend in late October, when she showed up at our house without warning, without even a courtesy phone call. She stood on the porch like she owned the place. Her key already out of key my husband had given her years ago without consulting me, a detail that still burned. The moment she walked in, she started rearranging things in the kitchen, moving my carefully organized spice rack, criticizing the way I'd stacked the dishes in the drying rack. It wasn't even her home, had never been her home. But it didn't matter to her. She had already claimed a space in our lives that I never agreed to give, had never consented to surrendering. And when I told her, as calmly as I could manage with my heart pounding, that I needed her to respect our space and our privacy, she smirked. Actually smirked, like I was a child who didn't understand how families work, how the world really operates. I remember watching my husband that night with a clarity that felt almost painful. He didn't say anything in my defense. He didn't stop her from taking over our kitchen, our home, our boundaries. He didn't defend me or stand up for the life we'd built together. He just stood there, frozen between the woman who raised him and the woman he married, paralyzed by the impossible choice he didn't want to make. And that silence, that deafening absence of support, cut deeper than any words could have. That was the night I decided something had to change, that I couldn't continue living this way, so I blocked her number from both our phones. I told him she wasn't allowed in our house anymore without invitation, without both of us agreeing. I told myself that this was the only way to protect what we had left, to save the scraps of our marriage before they disappeared entirely. But the thing about big decisions is that they don't come quietly. They don't fade into the background or resolve themselves peacefully. They echo through every corner of your life, bouncing off walls and amplifying until the sound becomes unbearable. From the moment I pressed that button, blocking her contact, it was like setting off a chain reaction. I couldn't stop, couldn't control, couldn't take back, no matter how much I might want to. The next morning I felt the distance between us settle like fog, thick, cold, impenetrable. He didn't yell at me. He didn't cry or slam doors or give me the explosive reaction I'd half expected. He just withdrew into himself, pulling back in ways that were somehow worse than anger. It was silence, deep and heavy and final. The kind of silence that fills a room and makes you feel like you're drowning even though you're standing on solid ground. I thought I was doing the right thing. I genuinely believed it with every fiber of my being. I thought I was protecting my kids from her toxic influence, protecting our home from her constant invasions, protecting my own sanity from the slow erosion of being criticized and undermined every single day. But I could feel the cost of that choice even before the full consequences revealed themselves, could sense the foundation crumbling beneath my feet. Please listen to my story and tell me in the comments section if I was right or wrong. Because blocking my husband from seeing his mother didn't just cause a fight, it led to a devastating event that shattered my marriage and our entire life in ways I never could have imagined. The first signs of the fallout came fast, faster than I'd anticipated. He started working late, or at least that's what he told me. He stopped asking me about my day, stopped sharing the little mundane details that had once felt like the glue holding us together. He kept his phone closer than before, like it had become his shield against me, like it contained secrets he needed to protect at all costs. I could tell he had started talking to her again. I knew it in my gut, but not in the open, not in any way I could confront directly. In the quiet, secret ways that destroy trust more effectively than any loud betrayal ever could. At first, I tried to pretend I didn't notice the changes. I cooked dinner like nothing had changed, setting the table with care, making his favorite meals. I tucked the kids in like I always did, reading bedtime stories with enthusiasm I didn't feel. I told myself we'd find a way to heal, that this was just a rough patch every marriage goes through. But every night, the distance grew a little wider, the silence a little heavier, until it felt like we were living on opposite sides of a wall I had built myself, brick by brick. She, on the other hand, was thriving in ways that made me sick to my stomach. I heard through his sister, who was still speaking to me then, though that wouldn't last, that his mother had started telling people I was controlling, that I had turned her son against his family. She painted herself as the victim in this story, the grieving mother cruelly separated from her beloved son. She always had that gift, that uncanny ability to manipulate narratives. She knew exactly how to twist a story until people saw her as the one who'd been wronged, the innocent party in a drama created entirely by someone else's cruelty. Soon, it wasn't just whispers among family members. It was friends calling him, people we'd known for years, asking why I was keeping him away from his own mother. It was messages from old college buddies asking if I'd really banned her from seeing the grandkids, as if I were some kind of monster. The pressure wasn't just in our house anymore, it was everywhere, surrounding us, suffocating us from all sides. And the truth was, part of me still felt guilty about what I'd done. A large part of me, actually. She was his mom, after all. I knew what that bond meant, understood the primal connection between mother and child, but she had also hurt us repeatedly, deliberately. She had hurt me in ways both obvious and subtle, and I couldn't keep letting her do it, couldn't keep sacrificing my well-being and my marriage on the altar of maintaining family peace. That guilt, though, was a crack in my armor that I couldn't patch, and she knew exactly how to use it, how to wedge it open wider and wider until I couldn't defend myself anymore. Every time I tried to talk to him about what was happening, about the distance growing between us, he shut down completely. He didn't defend her explicitly, he was too smart for that, but he didn't defend me either. He was stuck between two worlds, suspended in an impossible position, and with every passing day, I could see which one he was slowly choosing. I could feel him drifting back toward her, pulled by invisible strings I couldn't cut. I could feel my grip on our marriage slipping away like sand through my fingers. Not because I didn't love him, I loved him desperately, more than I knew how to express, but because I had forced him to choose between us, and I wasn't sure he would choose me. In fact, with each passing day, I became more and more certain he wouldn't. The days after that decision felt heavier than I expected, weighed down with a tension that permeated every moment. It wasn't loud or explosive, not at first. It was quiet, insidious, like something inside the house had shifted without warning, without announcement. Even the air felt different, like it was holding a secret between us, a truth neither of us wanted to speak aloud. I could tell the kids felt it too, though they were too young to fully understand. They didn't understand why Daddy didn't smile as much anymore, or why Mommy walked around the house like she was carrying something too heavy to set down. Our mornings used to be loud with laughter, and little voices fighting over cereal bowls and who got to use the blue spoon. But those mornings started to fade into silence, gray and oppressive. He'd leave early for work, sometimes before the kids even woke up. I'd linger at the table a little longer than necessary, staring at the empty chair across from me, wondering how we'd gotten here. My husband had always been close to his mom, unnaturally close. Some of my friends had quietly suggested over the years. She was the center of his childhood, the person who made him feel like he belonged when his father abandoned them. I had respected that bond for years, had tried to honor it even when it made me uncomfortable. I never wanted to be the stereotypical wife who came between a man and his mother. I'd heard those stories, seen those movies, and I was determined not to be that woman. But she never wanted to share him with anyone, not really. She wanted him all to herself, wanted to remain the most important woman in his life forever. And now, with her locked out of our lives by my decision, it was like a part of him was slipping away from me too, being pulled back toward her by forces I couldn't fight. I noticed the small things first, the subtle changes that accumulate over time. He stopped holding my hand when we sat together on the couch, something he'd done unconsciously for years. He started eating in the living room instead of at the table with the family, creating physical distance that mirrored the emotional chasm growing between us. His phone lit up late at night, casting blue shadows across our bedroom ceiling, and he'd tilt it just enough so I couldn't see the screen. I didn't need to know the words being exchanged. I already knew who was on the other end. It was her. It was always her. Her presence haunting us, even in her physical absence. I tried to convince myself that it was just a phase, that once things calmed down and emotions settled, we'd find our way back to each other. But she was clever, had always been clever. She used the distance like a tool, a weapon, turning every quiet moment into something bigger, more significant. She knew exactly how to work her way back in, through the smallest cracks in our defenses. She started sending gifts to the kids, little things that arrived in pretty boxes with cheerful notes attached. Things she knew I wouldn't be able to throw away without looking like the bad guy, without having to explain to confused children why they couldn't keep presents from their grandmother. She was smart like that, strategic in ways I hadn't fully appreciated before. She could make herself look loving and generous while simultaneously making me look cold and controlling. And every time the kids opened one of those packages with wide, excited eyes, I could feel my place in their story shrinking just a little more, my role as protector being recast as villain. I knew what she was doing. I could see the manipulation clearly, could trace the pattern of her behavior. She was working her way back in through the cracks in our marriage, planting herself where it hurt the most, like a weed growing through concrete. And the hardest part was that I couldn't stop it without becoming exactly what she said I was: controlling, bitter, jealous, unreasonable. He didn't talk about her out loud anymore, had stopped mentioning her name in conversation. But she was everywhere anyway, her presence more powerful in absence than it had ever been when she was physically in our home. Her shadow was in every argument we didn't have, in every conversation we avoided. Her voice was in every silence that stretched too long between us. It was in the way he stopped asking me to make plans together, like his mind was somewhere else, occupied by thoughts and loyalties that didn't include me. I found myself walking through our house late at night when I couldn't sleep, standing in the doorway of our kids' rooms, watching them sleep peacefully, unaware of the storm gathering around them. I thought about the kind of family I wanted to build, one where love felt steady and safe, where children grew up secure and confident. But that dream felt further away every day, slipping through my fingers like water no matter how tightly I tried to hold on. I kept replaying the moment I blocked her, that single tap on my phone screen. It should have been simple, straightforward, a reasonable boundary. But the weight of it was growing heavier with each passing day, pressing down on my chest until I could barely breathe. I didn't regret why I did it. I stood by the reasons, believed in them. I regretted how alone it made me feel, how isolated and attacked from all sides. Even when he was in the same room with me, sitting on the same couch or lying in the same bed, it was like he wasn't really there. His body occupied the space, but his heart was somewhere else, with someone else. And I hated that someone else was his own mother, hated competing with a bond that predated me by decades. The turning point came one night when he didn't come home until after midnight. I stayed up waiting, unable to sleep, staring at the clock like it might give me answers. My stomach twisted with anxiety every time I heard a car outside that wasn't his. And when he finally did come home, when that door finally opened and he walked through, the silence that followed was worse than any shouting match could have been. He moved around the house like a stranger passing through, like this wasn't the home we'd built together. No warmth in his eyes, no explanation on his lips. Just coldness, a chill that seemed to emanate from him and fill every corner of every room. That's when I realized something fundamental was changing in him. Not just between us as a couple, but inside him as a person, in the core of who he was. And me? I was starting to harden too, developing my own protective shell. Not because I wanted to, not because that's who I was naturally, but because loving him was beginning to feel like standing on a floor that could give way at any second, like building a life on quicksand. She was winning this war she'd started, not with loud declarations or open battles, but with quiet manipulation and strategic whispers in the dark. Not with direct confrontation, but with patient, persistent erosion of everything we'd built together. And I could feel the real storm coming, gathering strength just over the horizon. I just didn't know how big it would be, didn't know that it would destroy everything in its path. The nights started to blur together after that, each one bleeding into the next until I lost track of time. I'd lie awake long after the house went quiet, staring at the ceiling in the darkness, trying to figure out where things had started to unravel. Maybe it was the night she crossed the line, showing up uninvited and rearranging our home. Maybe it was the night I blocked her, taking that action I couldn't undo. Or maybe it had been happening long before any of those moments, and I just didn't want to see it, didn't want to acknowledge the slow poison spreading through our marriage. Every choice I made felt like walking through a minefield where there was no safe path forward. If I softened my stance, if I gave in even a little, she'd slip right back in and reclaim all the territory I'd fought to protect. If I stood my ground and maintained the boundaries I'd set, I'd drive him further away, push him back into her waiting arms. There wasn't a right path anymore. There was only the one I was already on, and it felt like it was leading me somewhere dark and inescapable. His absence grew louder than his presence had ever been. It wasn't just about him coming home late anymore, wasn't just about missed dinners or forgotten conversations. It was the way he moved around me like a ghost, like we were strangers trapped inside the same house by circumstances neither of us could control. He'd pass by me in the hallway without looking up, without acknowledgement. I'd cook meals he wouldn't touch, food going cold on plates while he claimed he'd eaten already. The kids asked why Daddy didn't read them bedtime stories anymore, their small voices confused and hurt, and I had to smile like it was nothing, like everything was fine, but inside it was everything. It was my whole world crumbling while I tried to hold the pieces together with bare hands. There's something about silence in a marriage that's different from any other kind of quiet. It doesn't come all at once like a sudden catastrophe. It builds gradually, incrementally. It starts with small moments you ignore because they seem insignificant. A quiet dinner where conversation feels forced. A forgotten goodnight kiss. A morning where you don't say, "I love you," because the words feel hollow. It's like a thread unraveling in a piece of fabric, and by the time you notice the damage, the whole thing has come apart in your hands. His mother kept finding ways to remind us she was still there, still relevant, still a force to be reckoned with, little reminders that she hadn't been defeated. A letter slipped into our mailbox without a return address, her handwriting unmistakable. A picture she sent to the kids through a mutual friend, showing her looking sad and alone. A card with a message that wasn't overtly cruel but carried the kind of manipulative sweetness that made me look like the bad one for keeping her away. She didn't have to raise her voice or make threats. All she had to do was make herself look like the loving, lonely mother being cruelly separated from her family, and the rest of the world filled in the gaps with their own assumptions. People started taking sides in a conflict they didn't fully understand. His sister stopped calling me, stopped responding to my texts. His aunt, who had always been kind to me at family gatherings, sent a text message that I could read the judgment in, even without hearing her voice. The extended family was closing ranks around her, circling the wagons, and I was slowly becoming the outsider, the villain in a story someone else was writing. I used to feel like this house was ours, that it was built out of love and late-night talks and shared dreams for the future. But now it felt like she lived here too, even though she hadn't physically stepped through the door in weeks. It was her presence in his eyes when he avoided mine. It was her voice in the way he defended nothing but gave me nothing back in return. It was her shadow in every cold night where the space between us in bed grew wider and more unbridgeable. I tried to keep the kids shielded from the growing tension, tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy for their sake. But kids aren't blind to these things. They see more than we give them credit for. They feel the tension before they can explain it, absorb the stress like sponges. My oldest started asking questions in that small, careful way kids do when they don't want to upset you but need answers. My youngest clung to me a little tighter at night, as if even he could sense something was breaking in the foundation of our family. And then there was me alone in my own kitchen at 3 a.m, staring at my phone, wondering if unblocking her would fix everything or if it was already too late for any kind of repair. I thought about the moment I first met her, years ago when our relationship was new. How warm she had seemed initially. How she smiled and called me family, welcomed me with open arms. I wanted to believe she loved me, or at least liked me. I really did. But over the years, slowly and painfully, I started to see how love could be twisted into something else, how it could become something sharp and cutting, something that wounds instead of protects. The weight of that choice I'd made hung on my chest like a stone, growing heavier each day. It wasn't just about a phone number anymore, wasn't just about access and boundaries. It was about the life I had built over years, the man I had loved since we were young, the family I thought I belonged to. It was about watching it all bend and crack under pressure I couldn't fully control or understand. And the worst part? I could feel something bigger coming, could sense it in the air like the electricity before a lightning strike, a line I hadn't crossed yet, a moment where everything would break for good, where there would be no going back or patching things up. I didn't know exactly when that moment would happen, but I could feel it in the way he avoided my eyes now, in the way the house felt smaller and more suffocating every night, in the way her shadow stretched across every corner of our lives even in her absence. This was the quiet before the storm, the eerie calm that warns you something terrible is approaching. And when the storm finally came, when everything finally broke apart, it wasn't going to be gentle or kind or leave any survivors. The calm didn't last as long as I'd hoped. It never really does when something has already cracked beneath the surface, when the foundation has been compromised. By the end of that week, I started noticing more little things, subtle changes in his behavior that added up to something I couldn't ignore. His phone was suddenly always face down on the table, the brightness dimmed, notifications muted. He had developed a new pattern of stepping outside right after dinner, claiming he needed air or a walk to clear his head, even though that had never been a habit before in all our years together. And the way his voice softened when he thought I couldn't hear him, like he was reaching out to someone he missed, desperately made my stomach twist into painful knots. I'd tell myself repeatedly that I wasn't going to snoop, that I'd stay strong and let him make his choices, that I'd trust him to work through this on his own, that I'd respect his privacy even when mine wasn't being respected. But it's strange how fear makes quiet footsteps sound louder. It amplifies every shift in behavior, every small hidden thing, until the not knowing feels unbearable, until the uncertainty becomes more painful than whatever truth you might discover. The thought of him sneaking around to contact his mother, going behind my back after everything we'd discussed, burned through me like acid. I couldn't forget the way she'd looked at me the last time we argued, calm, victorious, like she'd already won him back and was just waiting for me to realize it. Then things started escalating in small but undeniable ways. He came home late multiple times, saying traffic was bad, even though I could see from the location app on my phone. Yes, I'd started checking, and yes, I felt guilty about it, that he wasn't even near his office. He had a new scent on him some evenings, a faint powdery floral smell that I recognized immediately. It was the same perfume his mom wore to every family gathering, distinctive and unmistakable. It hit me like a punch to the chest, physical proof of what I'd suspected. She was finding her way back in, reclaiming the territory I'd tried to defend, and he was letting her. The breaking point came one night when he left his laptop open on the kitchen counter. I didn't plan to look. I swear, I didn't go into that room with the intention of invading his privacy. But it was right there, glowing in the dark like it was waiting for me, like fate had decided I needed to see whatever was on that screen. And when I moved closer, unable to resist, I saw the email. His mother had sent him a long, detailed message, pages of text, accusing me of tearing the family apart, calling me cruel, selfish, manipulative, emotionally abusive. But what made my breath catch in my throat, what made the room spin around me, wasn't just her words. It was his reply sitting right beneath it, a response he'd carefully composed. He told her he missed her, that he hated lying to me about their contact, that he didn't understand why I couldn't just let her be part of our lives like a normal person, that maybe, if things kept going this way, if I didn't change my attitude, he'd have to make a choice between us. That line sliced through me like a knife. Not because I didn't expect it, part of me had been waiting for this, but because it confirmed my worst fear in black and white. He was already halfway gone, already mentally out the door. The next few days felt like walking barefoot through broken glass. Every conversation turned tense, clipped, superficial. He avoided eye contact like it might reveal too much. I avoided asking the questions I already knew the answers to, afraid of what I might say if I let myself speak honestly. It was like we were both waiting for something explosive to happen, both holding our breath for the inevitable confrontation, but neither of us wanted to light the match that would burn everything down. Meanwhile, his mother's shadow stretched longer and darker across our marriage. I felt her presence in every quiet corner of the house, every unspoken tension between us. Then came the moment I made a choice I can't take back, a decision that would fundamentally alter everything that came after. One evening, while he was in the shower and I heard the water running, I picked up his phone from the nightstand. My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped it twice. And there it was, message after message, carefully hidden in an archived thread he thought I'd never find. She had been calling me names, terrible things no person should say about their son's wife. She was manipulating him systematically, telling him I was trying to control him, saying he deserved a woman who respected his family and his heritage. She even planted this idea that I was jealous of their bond, that my own mother issues were causing me to lash out at her. But what made my blood run cold, what made me feel physically ill, was his silence in response. Not defending me, not protecting the marriage we'd built, just letting her words stand unchallenged, implicitly agreeing with her assessment. That silence told me everything I needed to know about where his loyalties truly lay. I remember sitting on the bathroom floor that night after he'd gone to sleep, my knees pulled tight against my chest, whispering to myself in the darkness that maybe I'd made a terrible mistake. Maybe blocking her wasn't protection, maybe it was just a battle I could never win, a war where the casualties would always include me. But another part of me, the part that had lived through years of her whispered jabs, her subtle digs, her carefully orchestrated games, kept repeating that I had every right to draw that line, to protect my space and my sanity. But what do you do when the person who's supposed to stand beside you, who promised to be your partner through everything, starts slowly walking back toward the one who hurt you? What do you do when you're losing the war for your own husband's heart? That was when I decided to take things further, to stop being passive and start being proactive. I started checking his phone bill online, looking at his location history, noting the times he went out for a drive and where those drives actually took him. And the more I saw, the more evidence I gathered, the more it felt like the marriage I had fought so hard for was slipping through my fingers, grain by grain, moment by moment. And just when I thought I'd reached my limit, when I thought I couldn't take any more revelations, I made the decision that would push everything over the edge into chaos. I confronted him not with screaming or wild accusations, not with the melodrama he could dismiss as emotional instability, but with a quiet, firm question about where he'd really been the previous evening. His reaction wasn't guilt like I'd expected. It wasn't even surprise. It was fury, cold and hard, like I was the one breaking something sacred, like my desire for honesty was the real betrayal. And that's when I realized with devastating clarity, this wasn't just about me and him anymore. This had become a war, and I was fighting alone. The night I confronted him is burned into my memory with a sharpness and clarity that still stings when I think about it. The house was dim, quiet, the only light coming from the warm yellow lamp in the corner of the living room. It should have felt safe, familiar, like home. But instead, it felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, feeling the ground crumble beneath your feet, waiting for the inevitable fall. He was scrolling on his phone when I walked in, casual and seemingly unaware of what was coming, the faint sound of the TV humming in the background providing white noise to what would become one of the most important conversations of our lives. I didn't plan a speech ahead of time. I didn't rehearse what I'd say or practice my delivery in front of a mirror. My chest was too tight with emotion, and my hands wouldn't stop trembling no matter how I tried to steady them. It wasn't anger that filled me at that moment, not primarily, anyway. It was a strange, overwhelming mix of grief and disbelief, the kind you feel when someone you trust implicitly slowly becomes a stranger in front of your eyes, when the person you thought you knew reveals themselves to be someone else entirely. I stood there for a few seconds, just watching him, trying to reconcile the man in front of me with the man I'd married. The man who had once promised he'd protect me from anything that tried to hurt me, who'd stood at an altar and made vows I'd believed in completely. But there he was now, years later, protecting the one person who'd made it her mission to undo me piece by piece, to dismantle everything we'd built together. When I finally asked where he'd been that evening, simple words, a straightforward question, it came out softer than I'd intended, almost like I was afraid of my own voice, afraid of what it might unleash. There was no screaming, no threats, no dramatic accusations. Just a quiet question hanging between us like smoke, waiting for an answer that would determine everything. He didn't even look up at first, just kept scrolling through his phone like I hadn't spoken at all. When he finally did look up, when he finally acknowledged my presence, it wasn't guilt I saw written across his features. It was irritation, annoyance at being interrupted, at being questioned. That look hit me harder than any argument could have, because it told me exactly where his heart was leaning, showed me precisely where I stood in his hierarchy of loyalties. I repeated the question, stronger this time, with more firmness in my voice. And that was when his jaw tightened visibly, when his whole body stiffened like I'd just committed the greatest offense imaginable. He didn't give me answers or explanations. Instead, he gave me sharp, defensive words that twisted the situation around completely, making it sound like I was the one pushing him away, like my pain and confusion were inconveniences he didn't want to deal with, burdens he shouldn't have to carry. I stood there on the cold hardwood floor in my bare feet, feeling the distance between us stretch wider with every second that passed. My heart was pounding so loudly in my chest I could barely hear the actual words coming out of his mouth. It wasn't just what he was saying that devastated me, it was how he was saying it. Detached, cold, clinical, like he had already decided whose side he was on, whose needs mattered more, whose happiness he was willing to prioritize. I kept thinking about everything that led us to this moment, every sacrifice I'd made trying to protect what we built, every tear I'd cried alone in various rooms of this house, every night I'd stayed up convincing myself that setting a boundary wasn't the same as being cruel or controlling. But in that moment, watching him refuse to answer a simple, honest question, all of that crumbled into dust. I could feel my throat tightening painfully as I asked him again, this time with just one word. Why? Not the full question with all its implications and accusations, just that single syllable. Why did you choose her over me? Why didn't you defend what we have? Why are you letting her win this game she's playing? But he didn't answer the why. He didn't even try to explain or justify. He just brushed past me like I was an obstacle to be avoided, a problem he could walk away from. And the air that lingered after he left the room felt heavy and cold, as if the house itself had witnessed something quietly but irreversibly breaking apart. I stood there, long after the sound of his footsteps disappeared down the hallway, long after I heard the bedroom door close. My hands were clenched so tightly I'd left little crescent marks on my palms from my fingernails. It wasn't rage that filled me then, not exactly. It was the realization, clear and painful and final, that I was losing him. Not because of a single fight or one bad decision, but because somewhere along the way, gradually and then suddenly, he'd stopped fighting with me and started fighting against me. And that realization, that understanding of what had shifted between us, hurt more than anything she had ever said or done to me directly. The shift in how people saw me started quietly at first, not with screaming matches or open threats, but with whispers that slowly turned into echoes I couldn't ignore, no matter how hard I tried. It began with a few mutual friends, who suddenly stopped responding to my messages. People I'd known for years, people who'd been to our home for dinner parties, people I thought understood me. Neighbors who used to wave at me cheerfully from their lawns started looking away when I walked by, suddenly finding their phones or their gardens intensely interesting. And then, gradually, inevitably, my phone began lighting up with notifications I didn't want to read. Posts on social media, comments on photos, carefully chosen words that painted me as the villain in a story I didn't even get to tell, in a narrative someone else was writing. I knew it was her behind it all. She had a way of doing things without ever doing them directly, without leaving her fingerprints on the damage she caused. She didn't need to scream or confront people face to face. She just planted seeds of doubt in people's minds and let them grow wild, let other people do her dirty work. She'd always been charming in public, the kind of woman who smiled with all her teeth showing, but whose kindness felt like a trap if you looked closely enough. I used to think it was just me imagining it, being paranoid or oversensitive. But now, as I watched my social circle shrink and people's attitudes toward me change, I could feel her closing in from all sides. It wasn't just online either. She started showing up in places she knew I'd be, places where our paths would naturally cross. The grocery store I always went to on Saturday mornings. The little park near our house where I took walks to clear my head and try to process everything. She never said anything directly to me when our eyes met. She didn't have to say a word. She'd just stand there at a careful distance with that calm, smug look on her face, that expression that told me she thought she was winning this war. And maybe she was right. The tension at home thickened like smoke in a closed room, making it hard to breathe. My husband grew increasingly distant, almost mechanical in his interactions with me and the children. We were in the same house, sharing the same space, but it felt like living with someone who had already left emotionally. And every time I tried to talk, to reach across that growing chasm between us, to explain my perspective or hold on to the last fragile thread connecting us, he would shut down completely, or worse, he would defend her. It was as if the woman who made my life unbearable had become the center of his entire world, and I was just a shadow on the edges of it, fading more each day. And then came the message that made everything spiral completely out of control. A distant cousin I barely knew sent me a screenshot of a post his mother had made on social media, vague enough to be deniable if confronted, but cruel enough to make its point crystal clear. She wrote eloquently about a woman who breaks families apart, about wives who manipulate men and isolate them from their mothers, and about sons who are trapped in marriages built on control and maxis fear. She never mentioned my name explicitly, she was too smart for that. But everyone who read it knew exactly who she was talking about. All our mutual friends, all our family members, everyone in our community knew. That night, I sat in the kitchen alone long after everyone had gone to bed, staring at that cold cup of coffee in front of me that I'd forgotten to drink hours earlier. I'd always told myself I was strong enough to hold this family together, strong enough to protect what we'd built from her poison and manipulation. But the truth was settling over me like a heavy blanket. She wasn't just outside our marriage anymore, battering at the walls. She was inside now in his mind, in our home, in the cracks she'd carefully carved between us over months and years. And the cruelest part? She didn't even need to shout or make scenes or do anything overtly dramatic. She just let me fall apart on my own, watched from a distance as I self-destructed under the pressure. I wanted to fight back, wanted to scream the truth at everyone who believed her carefully constructed lies. I wanted to post my own version of events, to expose her manipulation and control. But part of me knew deep down that screaming wouldn't change a thing. She had the advantage in every possible way. She'd been in his life long before I ever existed, knew every button to push, every weakness to exploit, every angle to twist. And slowly, methodically, she was making me the enemy without ever lifting a finger against me directly. The more isolated I felt, the more desperate I became. I wasn't just losing my husband anymore. That loss was painful enough on its own. I was losing my entire community, my peace of mind, the safe little world I'd spent years carefully building with him. And while she smiled for photos with friends and relatives, playing the role of the wounded mother perfectly, I sat in the dark night after night, wondering how much more I could take before something inside me snapped completely. I thought blocking him from seeing her was the hardest decision I'd ever made in my life. I thought standing up to her, setting that boundary, would be the most difficult thing I'd ever do. But I didn't realize at the time that decision was just the beginning of a much bigger war, one where the rules weren't fair, where I was fighting with one hand tied behind my back, one I never really stood a chance of winning. The moment it happened, the moment I crossed the line I can never uncross, I didn't think of it as doing something wrong. It felt like survival, like a drowning person grabbing for anything that might keep them afloat. It felt like protecting what little I had left before everything slipped away completely. But looking back now, with the clarity that only comes from hindsight and loss, I can see how that choice changed everything, how it was the beginning of the end. It started with a feeling I couldn't shake, a gnawing certainty in my gut. He was lying to me. Maybe not with direct words, he was too careful for that, but with the way his eyes darted away when I asked simple questions, the way he started carrying his phone everywhere like it was a secret he had to protect at all costs. At night, he used to leave it charging on the nightstand within easy reach. Now, it was always tucked under his pillow like a treasure meant to be kept from me, like evidence of a crime he was committing. The silence between us had grown louder and more oppressive than any fight we'd ever had. Every dinner was quiet, awkward, filled with the sound of silverware scraping plates. Every morning felt colder than the last, like winter had settled permanently in our home. And every time I tried to reach him, to bridge the distance growing between us, it was like he was already halfway out the door, not physically present in another place, but emotionally and mentally gone in every way that mattered. So one night, after weeks of this torture, when he fell asleep exhausted from whatever he'd been doing all day, I made a choice that would haunt me. I unlocked his phone while he slept beside me, his breathing deep and steady. It wasn't hard to get in. I'd known his passcode for years, had never needed to use it secretly before. But this time, everything felt different. It wasn't just a number I was entering. It was a line I was stepping over, a boundary I was violating, one I could never pretend didn't exist once I'd crossed it. The messages were there, exactly where I feared they'd be. A long thread of conversations between him and his mother, going back weeks to right after I'd blocked her. Some were harmless on the surface recipes she wanted to share, small talk about the weather, family updates about relatives I barely knew. But buried in the middle, hidden between mundane exchanges, were the real wounds, the poison she'd been dripping into his ear. Her words were like venom disguised as maternal concern. She told him I was unstable, that my behavior was erratic and concerning. She called me manipulative, said I was isolating him from everyone who loved him. She told him I was dangerous for him and the children, that he needed to protect them from my influence. She painted me as a woman slowly ruining his life, and worse, so much worse, she was convincing him to leave me. And the most painful part, the thing that made my hands shake so violently I almost dropped the phone, wasn't her words. It was his responses. He didn't defend me even once. He didn't correct her distorted version of reality. He didn't even try to present my side of things or explain my perspective. He just agreed with her over and over again, quietly, passively, like my destruction was something he was willing to accept, even facilitate, like it was easier to let her poison the well than to stand up and stop her from contaminating everything we'd built together. My hands were trembling so hard the screen blurred before my eyes. I felt physically sick, like the ground had tilted sharply under me, and I was sliding toward an abyss. It wasn't just betrayal in the traditional sense. It was watching the man I loved, the man I'd built a life with, had children with, had sacrificed for become a stranger, one quiet message at a time, watching him choose her narrative over our reality. And that's when I did it. The action I knew would either save us or burn everything to the ground, with no middle path possible. I blocked her number from his phone completely. I went through and deleted the messages, erasing the evidence of their secret communication. I changed his contact settings so she couldn't reach him unless he noticed what I'd done, and manually reversed it. It was fast, instinctive, the kind of thing your hands do when your brain is too numb to think clearly, when panic overrides reason. I told myself it was to protect us, to give us a fighting chance, that maybe if the noise stopped, if her constant voice wasn't in his ear feeding him lies and poison, he would finally see me again. See us again. Remember what we'd built together, what we'd promised each other. But underneath that fragile justification, beneath the rational excuses I made to myself, was something rawer and darker, pure, primal fear. I was terrified of losing him completely. Terrified of being right about how deep her hooks had sunk into him, how much control she'd already established. The next morning, the air in the house felt still, oppressively quiet, almost too calm. He didn't notice right away what I'd done. He went through his normal morning routine, making coffee, getting dressed for work, checking his phone reflexively, and for a brief, selfish moment, I felt a wave of relief wash over me, like I'd built a protective wall around us again, like maybe I'd bought us some time to heal. But that kind of relief doesn't last. Not with someone like her, someone who doesn't give up easily. The silence broke faster than I expected, faster than I'd hoped. It started with visible confusion on his part. He kept refreshing his messages throughout the morning, frowning at his screen like it was malfunctioning, like technology was playing tricks on him. He walked around the house increasingly distracted, checking the Wi-Fi router, rebooting his phone multiple times, asking out loud if something was wrong with our internet service. I sat at the kitchen table pretending to scroll through my own phone, trying desperately to keep my breathing steady and my expression neutral. For a few hours, I thought maybe, just maybe, I could hold this fragile lie together long enough for things to cool down, for the temperature of this conflict to drop. But people like her don't disappear quietly. They don't accept defeat. By midday, she found a way to make her absence louder and more disruptive than her presence had ever been. First came the missed calls on the landline we rarely used, the phone ringing insistently in the hallway. Then, a text message from one of his cousins asking why he wasn't responding to family messages, why he'd gone silent. And then, finally, inevitably, the moment that cracked everything wide open, she showed up at our house unannounced, her car pulling into our driveway with a confidence that made my stomach drop. I heard her knock, that sharp, familiar rhythm that made my whole body tense with dread. He rushed to the door before I could even stand from my chair, before I could intercept or prepare myself. And when he opened it, when he saw her standing there on our doorstep, the look on her face wasn't angry or upset. It was triumphant, victorious. She'd figured it out somehow. She knew exactly what I'd done, could read the situation instantly. The way she leaned casually against the doorway, all smug satisfaction and calm certainty, made everything worse. She didn't yell or accuse me outright. She was too strategic for such obvious tactics. She just looked past him directly at me, with that sickening smile that communicated clearly, "You can't win this. You never could." And the moment he saw her standing there, the moment he connected the dots and realized what had happened, what I'd done to his phone, his whole expression changed in a way that broke my heart. He didn't look hurt by her absence. He looked betrayed, but not by her manipulation or her lies. He was betrayed by me, by my actions, by my attempt to protect us. It all happened so fast after that, like dominoes falling in sequence. His voice rose, filling our home with anger I'd never heard from him before. The air thickened with tension and accusations. Every word he threw at me felt like a door slamming shut inside our house, inside our relationship, inside my heart. He called me controlling, paranoid, unstable. He said I'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. And I stood there shaking, tears streaming down my face, trying desperately to explain why I'd done it, why I'd thought it would save us, why I'd been so scared of losing him. But none of it mattered anymore. None of my reasons or fears or love made any difference. In his eyes, looking at me with something close to hatred, I wasn't his partner trying to hold us together anymore. I was the enemy, the reason everything was falling apart, the villain in this story. She stood behind him throughout the confrontation, silent and still, like a shadow feeding off the chaos she'd orchestrated. She didn't have to say a single word to win. Her presence alone was enough. Her smug expression said everything. And when he walked out that door with her, when he chose to leave with his mother instead of staying to work things out with his wife, I knew with devastating certainty that something inside me had shattered in a way that couldn't be glued back together. I didn't chase after him into the driveway. I didn't scream or beg him to stay. I just stood there, frozen in our doorway, watching the two of them leave together, realizing that the moment I tried to silence her, the moment I tried to cut her out completely, was the exact moment I lost him forever. The house felt colder after he left that day, emptier in ways that went beyond his physical absence. The walls seemed taller, more imposing, closing in. The silence was heavier, more oppressive, filled with ghosts of conversations we'd never have. At night, I'd find myself staring at the empty side of the bed, his pillows still holding the indent from the last time he'd slept there, trying to replay every moment to see where I could have done something different. But no matter how many times I rewound the events in my head, no matter how many alternate scenarios I imagined, it always led back to that one choice. That one irreversible line I'd crossed when I touched his phone, when I deleted those messages, when I blocked her number without his knowledge or consent. He didn't come home that night. He didn't call or text to explain where he was staying. The next night passed the same way, and the night after that. Days turned into weeks with minimal contact, and the distance between us grew like a canyon that couldn't be bridged, deepening with each day of silence. Friends stopped calling me his friends. The couples we used to hang out with, even some people I'd thought were my friends independently. Family members began taking sides in a conflict they didn't fully understand, hearing only the version of events that painted me as unstable and controlling. And of course, she made absolutely sure everyone knew her carefully edited version of the story, the version where I was the cold, manipulative wife who tore a loving family apart for no good reason, who isolated a devoted son from his mother out of jealousy and spite. I told myself repeatedly I'd be strong, that I could weather this storm. I told myself he'd come around eventually, that he'd see through her manipulation once he had time to think clearly. But deep down, in the part of me that deals in truth rather than hope, I knew I'd lost him. Not because she was objectively stronger than me, not because her arguments were more valid, but because he wanted her voice more than he wanted mine. He'd chosen her version of reality over ours, chosen her comfort over our marriage. The moment that sealed everything, that made it all horrifyingly final, came in a single envelope delivered by a process server divorce papers. No conversation beforehand. No attempt at counseling or fixing anything. No last-ditch effort to save what we'd built over years of marriage. Just formal legal documents, ink on expensive paper, spelling out the quiet end of everything we'd created together. I sat at that same kitchen table where so much of this had unfolded, in that same chair I'd occupied through countless meals and conversations. Same view of the window looking out on our backyard where the kids used to play. Only this time, there was no warmth in the room, no shared laughter echoing off the walls, no husband sitting across from me planning our future. Just a stack of papers and the echo of a life that was no longer mine, a future that had been canceled. I thought about all the nights I'd fought for this marriage, all the boundaries I'd tried to set to protect us from her toxic influence, and that moment I chose to block him from the woman who'd been slowly dismantling us from the start. I thought it was strength at the time. I thought it was love, protective and fierce. But to him, to everyone who heard her version of events, it was betrayal. It was proof of everything she'd been saying about me. I learned later through mutual acquaintances that he'd moved in with her almost immediately. She got exactly what she'd wanted all along her son, back under her roof. No wife to stand in the way of their relationship. No competition for his attention and loyalty. And she didn't just get him back. She got to control the narrative, to own the story of what happened. She became the victim in everyone's eyes, the loving mother reunited with her son, and I became the villain everyone whispered about, the cautionary tale of what happens when wives get too controlling. What cut the deepest, what hurt more than anything else in this entire nightmare, wasn't even the loss of the marriage itself. It was knowing he never fought for me, never once looked back, never questioned whether he was making the right choice. He walked away without hesitation, without regret, without a second thought for everything we'd built together. Life didn't stop for me, even when it felt like it should have, even when I wanted the world to pause and acknowledge this catastrophe. I packed up the house we'd made into a home, sorting through years of accumulated memories. I signed the divorce papers with shaking hands, my signature making it all legal and final. I started over, one small shaky step at a time, building a new life from the wreckage of the old one. But the wound she'd inflicted and the wound I'd inflicted on myself by making that desperate choice didn't heal overnight. Some wounds take years, maybe lifetimes. There were countless nights when I lay awake, wondering if I should have handled everything differently. If blocking him from her wasn't the protective boundary I'd thought it was, but the trigger that detonated everything. If I'd just tolerated her presence a little longer, swallowed my pride and pain a little more, would we still be together? Would our family still be intact? But then I'd remind myself of why I did it, of the reasons that drove me to such desperate measures, of how her presence was suffocating us, poisoning every interaction, turning him against me drop by drop, of the way she'd slowly made me feel like a stranger in my own marriage, of the manipulation and lies and constant undermining of everything I tried to build. Still, knowing your reasons, understanding your motivations, doesn't always ease the pain of the consequences you have to live with. I lost more than just my husband in all of this. I lost my children in many ways. They went to live with him primarily, influenced by his narrative and her whispered poison. I lost my home, the house where we'd planned to raise our family. I lost friends who believed her version of events over mine. I lost my sense of security and belonging. I lost years of my life to rebuilding and recovering from the devastation. And she won. That's the hardest pill to swallow. She got everything she wanted: her son back, her grandchildren nearby, her control reestablished. She gets to celebrate holidays with them now, gets to be the central figure in their lives again, gets to smile in family photos while I'm cropped out of the picture entirely. Please tell me in the comments section if I was right or wrong to finally block my husband from his mom, because that single decision didn't just end our marriage, it cost me our home, ruined my relationship with my own children, who now barely speak to me, and left me completely alone with nothing but memories of the husband I lost and the family that was torn apart. And I know, somewhere in the back of my mind, that his mother will be celebrating Christmas with him in their new apartment this year, probably already planning how to further cement her victory and erase me from their family history entirely. Was I protecting my marriage? Or was I the one who destroyed it? Was I setting a reasonable boundary? Or was I being controlling like she always said? Did I lose him because of her manipulation or because of my own desperate actions? I genuinely don't know anymore. The lines have blurred so much over time, the truth obscured by pain and perspective. All I know is that I'm here alone, he's there with her, and our children are caught somewhere in between, learning lessons about love and loyalty that I never wanted to teach them. So, please, tell me, was I right or wrong?